Salim, the election's over, or is it? You know, there's a lot of court challenges going on. You and I wanted to get together to talk about it once a leader was picked, a president was picked, but that could be until January, who knows? A lot of developments have happened, of course, in the last few days with Judge Alito making a decision in Pennsylvania, and the revelation, apparently, and I have yet to confirm this, that the Department of Homeland Security has watermarked official ballots or official ballot paper in an effort to facilitate the discovery of fraudulent ballots. But you have a unique viewpoint on this whole scenario that's being played out, and it's being played out now since Donald Trump was chosen as the Republican nominee for president. Can you explain your theory about what's going on?
Yes, Robert, it is a theory, but before I come to my theory, Robert, here is a fascinating thing. You and I are speaking on Saturday morning after the election, that's 5 days after the election. The results remain contested. American people do not know who is the president-elect. On the night of the election, or early in the morning of the election after midnight, Joe Biden came out to assure his voters, his supporters, that was something around 12:30 on Wednesday morning, midnight of the election day, November 2nd, that he is going to win, that he is very close to getting his 270 electoral votes, and that the counting is going on and he will win the numbers eventually. And then 2 hours later, President Trump came out and he indicated that he won the election by all evidence. The counting was stopped at 9:30 in the evening, just about the time when it was very clear that he had won the election on the battleground states and the numbers. And you and I and so many of us were following the events. And the question is how and why the counting was stopped. And we now know why the counting was stopped. Fox News called out that Arizona had been carried by Joe Biden, even though the board was showing that president was leading in Arizona. And at 9:30, the thing was stopped. So now looking back at it retrospectively, and which is all over the map, people are talking about it. This was the moment when the what I would call the sting operation of the Democrat Party stepped in to steal the election, and the election was stolen through mail-in ballots, fall ballots, dumping of ballots, finding of ballots at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And it all happened in the plain view of the audience watching the events of November 2nd once the polling stopped and how the numbers crept up. Now, 5 days later, the same people, that is the Democratic Party, the Democratic operatives, the corporate media, academia, and the whole globalist alliance that for over 4 years have been telling the people that Donald Trump is an illegitimate president and that not to accept the 2016 result. The 2016 result was a disputed result, was a stolen result. It was a Trump-Russia collusion. They're the same people now who are turning around and saying to the people, to the American public and the rest of the world, that the election on November 2nd was a fair and square win for Biden, and that the rest of the people, the American public, need to accept the result. So we will see, if you keep those two things in mind, it is the same crowd of people since 2016 had gone into delegitimizing the result of the 2016 November election that was won by President Trump fair and square, even though it was disputed because he lost the popular vote and he won the electoral college vote. Uh, the same people now are saying that Biden has won when all the evidence that either we had lying eyes or what we saw going into the election, the crowds, the rallies, uh, the support that was there for President Trump right across the country, and Biden was in the basement basically, that Biden has accumulated or received more votes that is a popular votes, than Obama did in 2008. Um, that is almost unbelievable, but that's the claim, that's the numbers that is up on the board. And President Trump himself received more votes. I mean, it's close to 70 million. Um, and if this goes into, as we know, when at 2 o'clock in the morning, President Trump said that he is going to use all the resources at hand and that he is going to contest the result. He wants a recount. We entered the 2000 election scenario, the Florida recount,
The hanging chads.
the hanging chad. But the main point is that we have entered that arena now, 20 years later, and the election will be decided by the decision ultimately of the Supreme Court. So we have to wait until the Supreme Court sits down to look at the case that is going to be presented coming up from the lower courts. And we won't have a result in hand until maybe sometime uh, in January. So we are now in the waiting period. We are now in the period in where the lawyers and the litigation process are going to be launched. And it is just amazing that in the most advanced country in the world, they have a voting system uh, that is open to all sorts of fraudulent manipulation.
It's very embarrassing for the Americans because they've got 244 years to get this right, and they have yet to do it. And they're looking like, as many people are saying, a banana republic. There are countries in the world which have much more stricter methods of confirming that a person who is voting is eligible to vote and that the ballots are properly counted than the United States of America. This is quite embarrassing for that country.
Absolutely. I mean, our own Canadian system in that sense is far more superior. I mean, the Americans have resisted. Let's clarify it. The Americans who have resisted are basically the political class, and in particular, the Democratic Party. The very simple solution is voter ID. That the person who is casting his ballot is the same person who has come in to pick up the ballot and cast it. It's as simple as that. And you and I and all of us Canadian, 37, 38 million of us across this country, whatever is our concern about the results of the election, and those concerns are genuine, how the media plays the pre-election scenario that leads to the results. None of us have disputed our system. We have all basically agreed that our system is, in a sense, genuine, authentic, and the integrity of the vote is
Yes,
there.
as a matter of fact, I was just considering how hallowed the polling booth used to be, and probably still is for a lot of people, and how a person's ballot was treated like a venerable relic. And yet we see in the United States videos of counters just destroying, crumpling up ballots and tossing them away, hiding them under their desk, filling in the blanks, the ovals, and it's come to a complete disrespect of the entire process.
Absolutely, and dead people voting and people voting more than once, and all of that. So the electoral roll, the electoral register itself is corrupt because it is not updated in a manner before the election that the integrity of the people who are going to be voting is secured, that anonymous and dead people and characters that possibly never existed but have been created are voting. So that is a remarkably a situation that goes and flies against everything that the American Republic stands for. That is the rule of law, and that is totally missing. I mean, in a democracy, and we talk about it, America is not a democracy in the sense, and that's getting into political science stuff, but it is a democracy in the sense people vote, and it is people elect their representatives, and at the highest office, the president, the people are voting for. That should be open to manipulation. That is not in a democracy. The vote is a sacred right, and that the integrity of the vote can be nullified, which is what in effect happened on November 2nd. It's not the first time, by the way, and we can go into historical record for that. But on November 2nd, right in front of the entire world watching closely the American election, knowing what is at stake, the vote, the vote of the people were nullified, not in tens or hundreds of thousands, but in millions, it seemed, right across the battleground stage. They were nullified. And so whatever is the eventual result that comes down, as it came down in 2000 with the Supreme Court deciding that the Florida recount led to George Bush being elected and winning the Electoral College vote, this election is already stained. It is going to be disputed. America is now completely torn apart. It was torn apart, we knew that, but this is completely now torn apart. And so we need to step back. I mean, in my view, we need to step back and try to explain it, what happened, or why did it happen, or what was the mechanism, the modus operandi. And that's where my theory comes in, Robert. You recall, we are of, in generational term, close in our age, we're similar. You recall the movie from 1973, The Sting?
Oh, yes.
With
It's a great movie. Saw it several times. The theme song is still in my head.
Well, I would recommend, you might want to pull it up again. It is possibly one of the finest comedy, thriller, scam that was ever produced. It won the best Oscar for the best movie of the year in 1973. It also won the best director, screenplay. It lost the best actor. I don't remember who won the best actor in 1973, but anyhow, Robert Redford was up for best actor. So the storyline, if you remember, and for the audience, I would strongly recommend people go back and pull that movie up and look at it. I just love it. The story was told so beautifully and flawlessly. The Sting, that's the title of the movie. And what was the Sting? I mean, we cannot go into all the detail, but the meaning of the Sting is that the con men, in this case in the movie, the con men, the two grifters, Paul Newman and Robert Redford, set up a scheme where they're going to sting the Irish mobster in Chicago of the 1930s, played by Robert Shaw. Donnie Lonigan was the character's name in the movie. And so they set up this scheme, and the scheme is, in very simple term, creating an alternative world, fabricating an alternative world, and selling that alternative world that is fabricated to the target, who is going to be stung. The target can be a single individual, it can be an organization, it can be a people, a nation. And that's what the spy games are all about. But here in the movie The Sting, the target audience was the mobster, Donnie Lonigan, who was going to be stung. And there are two things required for a successful sting operation. One is the fabricated world, the alternate world that is created, is so real, and in fact, is made to appear real, that the target audience believes it. And therefore, the number two aspect, the target audience then acts according to the premise of the alternate world that has been created. In the movie, the premise is that the world of gaming that these two conmen have put together, in this world of gaming, they can predict the winner by breaking through into the operation in real time that is going on. And so if you put the bet on the right horse in the race, that they have the inside information, then you can, break the bank. So that was the scheme that was set up, and Donnie Lonergan fell for it. The alternative world was so real that he came in and he put his money eventually, which was a whole exercise, on the horse that actually did not win, and they walk away with the money. So here, keeping that analogy in mind, the alternate universe, the alternate world, the fabricated narrative, false narrative, was one that after the 2016 election, in fact, it began before the election, but in the real sense, it was put together after by the Obama administration through its security and intelligence agencies, the FBI and the CIA. Now we know the entire play that was made. It was Operation Crossfire Hurricane. That was the code name for the fabrication of the false narrative of Trump-Russia collusion. That Trump is simply the agent of Putin, and the 2016 election was robbed by Trump and Russia. How and why? Well, that was the false narrative that was created. Hillary Clinton was the target. Her computers were hacked. The story about her corruptions were all basically made up by the Russian, sold by the Trump people. And the election was stolen. Now, nobody in 2016, going back to 2016, and you and I and others, we talked about it a lot that time after Trump won the primary or came down the Golden Tower, the Trump Tower, to announce that he's going to run in June of 2015. And then the next year, as the primary unfolded, he became the nominee. Then the election, nobody in the corporate media, in the academia, ever put any money on the fact that Trump could win. On the night of the election, November the 8th, 2016, you will recall the New York Times needle that night was showing that Hillary Clinton had over 90% chance of winning the election. I mean, 90% chance, it was inevitable she is going to win the election. Every forecast was that she's going to win the election. And everybody was totally confident that Hillary will win and she will be Obama's third term. But lo and behold, Trump won and surprised everybody. But the people most surprised was the ruling class in America, the political class in America that had basically invested in Hillary winning the election and carrying on. The globalist allies, the billionaire oligarchs, the corporate media, the academia, they were all taken by surprise. And they thought and they saw that this was a fluke win, but they had to delegitimize Trump's presidency. So long and the short of it is, right from then moment on, the sting operation began. The target was not Trump. The target was the American people. The alternative universe that they created, which was so easy for them to create because the corporate media is simply the extended arm of the Democratic Party, the billionaire oligarchs funding the corporate media, the academia, basically left leading and fully on side of the Democratic Party. So all of that was employed even as President Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017, was employed to create this belief in real time that Trump was an illegitimate president, that this presidency was based upon Russia-Trump collusion. Indeed, 20 minutes after Trump was sworn into office on January the 2017, Washington Post ran the story that the process of impeachment is now already begun. 20 minutes after President Trump had been sworn in, that was the story in the paper bought by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, the world's richest man, you know. So there was the corporate media. The journalists, the media hacks were simply there to do the bidding of the owner. And that's what they did. The Bob Woodward, the Carl Bernstein, and the whole gang. And if you recall, the inauguration day, all the protest people came out. The Trump supporters came out, but the Democratic protest people came out. Famously, you know, remember the women who with their pink hats looking like their, you know, genitals, wearing that. And famously Madonna, you know, talking about, you know, we are going to, you know, bomb the White House and so on and so forth. So the Hollywood celebrity were all up in arms. And the point that I'm bringing to bear here is the sting operation was on. And so what did we get? We got a false narrative that implicated General Michael Flynn with his telephone call, which he was doing as a matter of routine, which is always done during the transition period between the time of the election and the president-elect being sworn in, as the president-elect puts together his team when he comes into office, into the White House. So Michael Flynn was a designated national security advisor, General Flynn, and he was taped speaking with the Russian ambassador, Mr. Kislyak, in preparation for the transition. But that telephone call was spun by the Obama administration as Joe Biden in the last meeting of the Obama administration in the White House, or one of the last meetings, said that this phone call goes against the Logan Act. Logan Act going all the way back to 1790s, you know, that had never been used. And that was the line that was spun, to the extent that President Trump then had to take Michael Flynn out of that position for which he had been put up, that he would be national security. He was the casualty, and he remains. All of the charges later on were shown were all fabricated charges by the DOJ, the Department of Justice, and the case was withdrawn. But the judiciary, the judge that was sitting on the case of Michael Flynn, still hasn't, you know, given Michael Flynn the dismissal of the case, as the Department of Justice had indicated he should be. So it began with Michael Flynn. It then went on, as the story then proceeded, to the appointment of the special counsel, Bob Mueller. And for the next 3 years almost, Bob Mueller, as a special counsel investigating the White House, went deep into the spinning of the story that there was the Trump-Russia collusion. All of that has now come out, and we know the Foreign Intelligence Security Court, Surveillance Court, put up warrants to snoop into members of the Trump campaign team, junior members like Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, etc. So this fabricated story was like the dark cloud sitting on top of President Trump, till 3 years later, in 2019, special counsel wrote the final report and saying there is nothing there. There was nothing there to begin with, because this was the alternate universe that was being spun. This was the sting operation. But the people were made to believe that Trump had been or was a Russian agent. But then immediately as the special counsel's report ended, the Democratic Party went into operation and they fabricated the charges of abuse of power and obstruction of justice, all because of the conversation, which was again snooped between President Trump and the Ukrainian president, and where President Trump asked for if they're going to investigate the case about Burisma, the oil company that had been paying out special money to Hunter Biden. So that was used to bring the charges of impeachment. That fabricated case was again something that came to nothing. President Trump stood up, fought back, and the Democrats did not have the numbers in the Senate to get the 2/3 vote to oust the president, as they had done with Richard Nixon in 1974 on the Watergate hearing. So that ended. By the way, this year now seems like, ancient history. In January of 2020, the Republican vote, the Senate vote took place. The trial took place, the Senate vote took place. President was fully exonerated, except for that one Republican senator, Mitt Romney, voting, on the charge of abuse of power, but then not voting to find him guilty. So that collapsed, and then within a week or so, the other sting operation was launched, and that was the Wuhan flu coronavirus, which led to the complete lockdown of the economy. Despite every effort on the part of Trump and his team to deal with the problem, and it was Joe Biden who called him a racist, a bigot, a xenophobic, because he stopped the travels from China, etc., etc. But the sting operation was to create the story and hold Trump responsible for what subsequently happened, which is exactly as it was played out in the debates and leading up to the election. That the Democratic talking point, which Biden's was his only talking point, was that Trump had mishandled the greatest crisis, that is COVID-19, and he was personally responsible for the death of 200,000 Americans. That became, and as we saw in the debate that happened, the two debates, there was not a smidgen of discussion on foreign policy, on economic results, on what President Trump had achieved in the 3.5 years in office. And here's a man who had been 50 years in Washington, and whose achievement is basically the sellout of America to the Chinese, to the globalists, was going to be the savior for the American people. That was the narrative. So all of that, if you put together, and the final nail in the piece is that 2 weeks before the election, the New York Post finally broke the story on Hunter Biden's laptop with the full hard disk that revealed all of that President Trump had asked for investigation, that the Ukrainian, the Burisma oil company, had put up Hunter Biden on his board of director to buy influence into Obama White House. The only reason Hunter Biden became the board of director on Burisma because his father was the vice president and he was responsible for Ukraine, and that Hunter Biden was being paid something like $80,000+ per month for a job for which he had no qualification and no understanding and no background, that is on the energy sector. But there it was pay to play, the exact scheme of the Hillary Clinton Foundation, pay to play, while she was the Secretary of State, and she gathered up over $200 million from around the world for her foundation. plus the Chinese. Again, Joe Biden was the point man for China in the Obama administration. He was a point man for Ukraine, for China, and for a number of EU countries. And Kazakhstan, another energy producing country. And in the case of the Chinese, again, the records were there that the Chinese had paid or invested through their state-owned enterprise over $1.5 billion to set up Hunter Biden with the stepson of John Kerry, the former senator from Massachusetts, and later the Secretary of State in the Obama's second term after Hillary Clinton stepped down. John Kerry's son or stepson, Chris Hines, I believe his name is, of the Hines fortune. Hines' son and John Kerry's stepson and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, they had set up this investment company into which the Chinese poured in the money. And there it was clear again of the pay-to-play scheme. And then with all of the horrendously despicable pictures and videos of Hunter Biden smoking cocaine and engaged in sexual activity, the worst type of pornographic pictures in there. Very clearly, the Chinese had set him up for blackmail purpose. So Biden was completely exposed to if he gets anywhere close to power or entering the White House, he would be then open to blackmail. So what did the oligarchy, the corporate media, the Democratic Party, what did they do? I mean, when this story broke with the New York Post printing the first cache of Hunter Biden's laptop that had come into their possession through the man who had Hunter Biden's laptop and was given to him, this man, a repairman, a computer repairman in Delaware by Hunter Biden, and then Hunter Biden forgot to pick it up. He possibly was so smoked out, he's a drug addict, that he never collected his Mac laptop. And for 1 year, it sat in this man's office till finally he knew what was in there, got very worried about it. And so he asked the FBI to come and pick it up. And the FBI came and picked it up, but there was no investigation. He had made copies of the hard disk, and one of the copies of the hard disk was delivered to Rudy Giuliani and his team of lawyers. Rudy Giuliani was a U.S. attorney for the state of New York. His first most important career success story is, before he became the mayor of New York, before 9/11, he was the U.S. attorney who led the prosecution against the mafia dons in New York, cleaned out the mafia, So here was Rudy Giuliani with the hard disk. He's also President Trump's closest advisor and friend. He tried to bring this to the attention of the DOJ and the FBI. The FBI and the DOJ did have the hard disk, but nothing was done till New York Post broke the story. And that was in mid-October, and immediately the corporate media and the tech giants that control all the media platforms like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, they all in unison went out to censor and block the story. So New York Post story could not be put up in any of the social media platform. It was not discussed. In other words, in effect, a cone of silence was dropped upon the New York Post story. And as we saw in the two debates, the first one with Chris Wallace of Fox News, who we now know, and I've always known, was a Democrat operative, who was given the task of moderating the debate, uh, did everything to stop President Trump from discussing or putting on the table the Hunter Biden story. He was not allowed to discuss that. And the same thing happened in the second debate. The moderator, this time an NBC journalist hack, did the same thing. She protected Biden. So a cone of silence was put on the Hunter Biden story. The vast majority of the Americans did not have any inkling on this matter. And the story was treated again as a disinformation campaign by the Russian.
And of course, socialist media like Twitter and Facebook were complicit in the cover-up of the laptop reveal as well by deleting posts and suspending accounts that would talk about it.
Precisely. I mean, remember, the same people who are now talking about Biden as the president-elect and having done this thing with the people who basically created and fabricated the story of the Trump-Russia collusion and ran with it for 3 years when there was no there. And in the case of the Hunter Biden, the material facts are there, the evidence is there. It needed to be investigated, whether, before you dismiss it, bring it out. And that's the role of the media. At least that was the role of the media that we were all taught to believe, that the public has been taught to believe. And now we know that the media is not there to do objective investigation. It is there to spin narratives. And so that's where I come back. You said it was my theory.
We've talked a lot of...
Oh, sorry?
I say we talk a lot about how the media really is, as Donald Trump said, the enemy of the people. But what gets me about this particular election and the alternate reality that you're painting is the complete lack of justice being served. Attorneys general are not doing their job. The police are not doing their job. Courts are not doing their job. Barr is not doing his job. And you see images, for example, of polling clerks with a Biden 2020 mask on, receiving ballots in clear violation of the law. Why aren't these people arrested? You see people in line inside the polling station being handed how to vote Democrat. You have one instance of a lady who was in line to vote getting one of those forms with a $5 bill saying, "This is how you vote Democrat and here's $5 to do so." Complete violation. Why aren't these people in jail? This, to me, is tantamount to a coup. It is, you no longer need tanks and soldiers to destroy a government and take it over. All you need are operatives, as you're calling them properly, in key positions, running the show. So, I mean, the United States has flipped to a complete socialist state, or at least it looks as if that's going to happen. Not by exterior forces, but just like the Republic of Rome, by an interior breakdown of the mechanism by which it's supposed to survive. I think that I mentioned this before, but when Benjamin Franklin said, "A republic, if you can keep it," it turns out that you can keep it for 244 years, but that's seems to be about the length of time a republic will survive.
Yes, Robert, I mean, we can come back and have a historical discussion on this matter, but coming back to the election, the sting operation that I've been talking about, and everything that you say just fits into the narrative or the explanation based upon that analogy of the sting, fits into this. What in effect happens, the sting is creating that false narrative or the alternative world. The Democrats succeeded fully because they have all the resources. That is, they are the globalist allies. I mean, the whole globalist agenda that came into being at the end of Cold War. I mean, remember, it was President Reagan who was, you might say, the last president who was the president who stood for America first. You know, he talked about America as a shining city on the hill. He said, you know, what is the solution of the Cold War that had been going on for almost half a century by the time Reagan came into office? And he said, in simple terms, the solution or the end is that we win, they lose. But the entire operation of the Cold War structure that had come into being was very powerful elements both in America and outside of America, that the Soviet Union were invested in the Cold War, you know. And again, you know, as I said, we can go back and discuss history. The last great president of the United States, we're talking about the period after 1945, was Eisenhower. There are two great generals that were elected as president. If we put aside George Washington. George Washington was the general, the military commander of the Revolutionary War. And then he was the first president, and he's the founding fathers. So I might correct myself, three generals, but I wanted to put aside General George Washington in a total different category. So the two great generals that were elected president, winning general, first was Ulysses Grant, the man who won the Civil War. You know, he was elected president. So, and Ulysses S. Grant, the greatness of Ulysses S. Grant was precisely that. He was the general who won the Civil War, and he wanted to bring that war to an end. That means he began the reconstruction to bring together the North and the South, you know, in that sense. For generals know what the cost of the war is, just like as surgeons know what is the cost of surgery. You know, they don't want to go in and do that because it's so painful and so destructive, the consequences. The next man who became the president almost 100 years later, or at least 90 years later, in quick math, is Eisenhower, the general of the army, five-star general, the man who led the crusade in Europe, who defeated the Third Reich, an amazing man and an amazing person in retrospect. And he became the president in 1952 and his two term. And similarly to President Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, the 8 years of President Eisenhower were the 8 years of peace and prosperity. America never stepped in. Under Eisenhower, America never went to war, never invaded any country. In fact, the very first thing that Eisenhower did was to bring an end to the Korean War. And then on the last day in his office, or 2 days before the inauguration of John F. Kennedy in 1961, President Eisenhower gave his farewell address to the nation. And in that address, most famously, he talked about the military-industrial complex. Here is the man who was the only man in America who had the authority, the legitimacy, the knowledge, the personal experience to speak about something that nobody else could speak about. That is, in his lifetime, as he said, what had emerged in America, the military-industrial complex, could end up running America, and he warned the American people about it. Well, 1961 and 2016, you do the maths, you know, almost 60 years later, it's Obama's security and intelligence agencies, which have been spun out of the military-industrial complex, engaged in the sting operation to nullify the vote of the American people. In effect, America became a Potemkin village. So the long and the short of it is, as you correctly point out, all of these people, including President Trump's most important cabinet official, or that is the cabinet official of any president, is the Attorney General, the man responsible for the Department of Justice. In that sense, the man responsible for the law and order and the enforcement of law and order that is on the books, in the statute, and in the Constitution. Jeff Sessions, now we know, was implicated. You know, he recused himself instead of basically, you know, putting, stumping down upon this fabricated story of the Russia-Trump collusion. Jeff Sessions recused himself, and all of the subsequent thing that happened under his deputy, Rod Rosenstein, the appointment of the special counsel and so on. And then after the 2018 election, when Jeff Sessions' resignation was taken by President Trump, and he nominated Bill Barr to be the Attorney General. And as you correctly point, nothing happened. You know, Bill Barr did the foot dragging all through, and there was no indictment of the people who created this Trump-Russia collusion story. As chiefs of CIA, and that's John Brennan, as head of FBI, that's James Comey, the head of national intelligence, that was James Clapper. All of these people, you know, James Clapper, an ex-army general, so you can connect the dot, and it goes back to exactly where Eisenhower was warning the American people about the military-industrial complex. So in effect, what happened, again, in a very short, you know, thumb sketch, President Trump was inaugurated on January 2017. But in effect, now we can look back and see he became the 45th president of the United States of America, but he was a Potemkin president because the people around him were people that he could not trust. The people that he appointed as the executive, that he had the executive authority, were people he could, or maybe he could work with. But as you know, no cabinet official can be appointed without the advice and consent of the Senate. And Mitch McConnell, the Republican majority leader, did not allow President Trump to make any appointments of his own choosing. He was given a list, so to speak, that he could make those appointments that would get the rubber stamp of the Senate, that is the advice and consent. So right from day one, President Trump was handcuffed. He didn't have his own people around him. He didn't have, remember, John F. Kennedy becomes the president and appoints the attorney general. Who is his attorney general? Robert Kennedy, his brother. Obama becomes the president. Who does he appoint his attorney general? Eric Holder. What did Eric Holder say? I am the president's wingman. And Donald Trump appoints Jeff Sessions, who has been in the Senate from Alabama. He was senator of Alabama for over 2 decades. And what does he do? Within a matter of weeks, he recuses himself on the issue of this fabricated story, the sting operation, Trump-Russia collusion, and lets his deputy, Rod Rosenstein, who's part of the inner circle of the Obama administration, you know, globalist agenda, to appoint Robert Mueller as a special counsel to go into President Trump's files, you know, and dig deep into it. They didn't find anything. But the fact of the matter is that those 3 years of President Trump in office, he was handicapped. He couldn't do anything that could then be construed, and which is what it was construed as his conversation with the Ukrainian president, that he was engaged in abuse of power and in obstruction of justice, for which he was impeached. Now, the 337 million American people, how many of them are going to dig in and understand what happened in the last 4 years? Well, there will be a lot of people who will dig in. So the people who will dig in are the president's supporters, are the Republican, are people like you and me who care about and believed in the question of the rule of law, the virtue of a Republican government, the Constitution, justice, integrity, honor. But what has happened, I would say, in ironically, this is the 75th anniversary of the end of Second World War. What happened 45 years ago? The army led by General Eisenhower, the American army, went into Berlin, or actually the Russian army, Soviet army came into Berlin, but the American army, that was an agreed upon that it would be the Soviet army that will actually enter Berlin. But anyhow, the Allied army swept into Germany, into as close to Berlin as they had agreed upon with the Soviet. And Hitler was taken out. And the Third Reich was brought down, destroyed. 75 years later, I said on the night of the election to another friend that we have just witnessed after Biden came on at 12:30 in the evening. We have just witnessed, I said, take note, this is an historical event that Joe Biden, as the Judas of American politics, have now signed on to sell America to the globalists and the Chinese communists for $1.5 billion. For 30 shekel, Judas sold Jesus to be crucified. I don't know, you don't know what will happen in the next 5-6 weeks. I do believe that President Trump has a counter punch that he has prepared, because he fully knew that this sting operation was on right from way back in November, December of 2016. He knew the sting operation was on. And he repeatedly, especially in the last 2 months or so of this campaign, the 2020 campaign, pointed out to the people, the thousands and thousands of people who turned up despite COVID-19 and the lockdowns, turned up in the airports across the United States where he landed and spoke to people. He told them that they're coming after, not after me. They're not coming after me. They're coming after you.
He's just in the way.
That's right. So there it is. I mean, my point. They're coming after you. The sting operation was for the American public to deceive them and nullify their vote. It was not about President Trump. President Trump, they were going to take him out. They were going to take him out by hook or by crook. Chinese money, the business oligarch, the corporate media, the Democratic DNC operatives. So you say, what about the police? What are the people in the polling booth? Remember, in the debate and right through this campaign, President Trump kept challenging Joe Biden and the Democratic Party repeatedly. Tell the American people, where is the law enforcement agency that have supported you and endorsed you? Not a single law enforcement agency, that is the police union, right across the United States of America, endorsed Biden. It was all of them endorsed Trump. So now I come and ask the question. They endorsed President Trump. How is it that the union members, that is, the people who wear the uniform, the blue line, remember the flag that was created with the blue line, where were the men with the blue line, men and women with the uniform, taking the measures necessary as they saw it right in front of their eyes in real time, the fraud taking place? And as you say, and as I saw, at least to the extent that we saw on the media, the social media, they did not act. And I come down and say, that's exactly where we have arrived at. The republic is no longer the republic. Remember, Benjamin Franklin said to the people who asked him after he came out of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, 1787, Benjamin Franklin was an old man. He was in his 80s. But he was one of the 39 signatories to the Constitution. He was representing the state of Pennsylvania, or the colony of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as a delegate that was sent to the ratification process. 55 members were sitting there. 39 members signed the Constitution, and Benjamin Franklin was one of them in ratifying it. So they had the two-thirds majority. George Washington was one of them who signed. He was from the state of Virginia, or the colony of Virginia. So when he comes out of the convention, the people surround him and ask, what have you done? What have you created? And that famous reply, a republic, if you can keep it. If you can keep it. I would say that the American people, or at least 70 million people, on the evening of November the 2nd, did their job. They came to keep the republic. The question is the other half, whether they are, again, a fabricated number, and I would argue they are a fabricated number. The number that is being shown that voted for Biden is actually a fraud that has been pulled down the American people, the sting. But there is enough people on the other side who are not defending the republic, who are defending their pension.
You paint a remarkable scenario, Salim, that is worthy of books and movies. I doubt we'll ever get to see such books and movies, but I thank you for painting that picture for us and putting things into proper perspective. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Robert.